Hi everyone, and welcome back to another lesson. In this lesson, we're going to look at how to work with functions. In Python, a function is a block of code that performs a specific task. Functions help us organize our code, avoid repetition, and make it easier to understand and modify. You already use built-in functions in several of your applications, like print, which outputs text to the screen, and len, which tells us the number of items in a collection. But we can also define our own custom functions. Before we do, let's appreciate why we use functions to begin with. Consider the following script. If we save this file and run it, the following lines are output to the terminal. We can see that the only change in these three lines is the name that's used to issue the greeting. We could simplify this code by rewriting it to use a function as follows. So now we can get rid of these first three lines. And if we save our changes and run the program again, we see that we've output the exact same code, but we've written significantly less. This is the benefit of functions. We can name a reusable block of code and call it whenever we want to use it. Now that we understand why we use functions, let's look a little closer at their anatomy. To define a function, you start with the keyword def, which is short for definition. After this, you put in the function name, and function names follow the same rules and conventions that variable names follow. After the function name, we add our parentheses, and we end the line with a colon. Let's see this in action with a function called hello world. So we use the def keyword, and we're going to call our function hello world. We'll put our parentheses afterwards and end it with the colon. This line is called the signature of a function. It explains exactly what we need to do to call this function when we want to use it. After adding the signature of the function, we'll move on to the body of the function. The body of the function contains the individual instructions that we want the program to execute whenever this function is called. So in this case, our body is very simple. We just want to print hello world. So if we save that, then our function is defined. But if we want to call the function to use it in our application, now all we have to do is type in the function name followed by the parentheses. If we save that and run again, we see that after the three lines of code that we output before, we have our function output hello world. Now you try. Write a function called Python is fun that prints Python is really fun to the screen. We'll see how you get on in a few seconds. Did you succeed? Remember, to define a function, we use the def keyword and then the function name. So in this case, we type Python is fun. And then we add the parentheses and end the line in a colon. Then in the body of our function, we output the instruction. And here it's a simple print statement. That says Python is really fun. Then we can close our indentation and call our function just like that. So if we run the script, we would expect to see Python is really fun output to the terminal. If you didn't get that, it might be worth rewinding and watching the video again to really understand the anatomy of a function. Some functions use additional information to execute. We saw an example of this in our greet function, where we passed in the name of the user we wanted to greet and use that to output the greeting. But let's create another function called addition that prints the sum of two numbers to see this in further action. So again, we'll start with the def keyword, and in this case, our function is called addition, and it expects two numbers. So I'll call them number 1 and number 2, and I'll still end it with a colon. Then I'm going to output the statement number 1 plus number 2 equals number 1 plus number 2. So if I call this function, it now expects two numbers to execute properly. So if I say 2 and 2, then we would expect the output to be 4. 2 plus 2 equals 4. If you try to run this function without specifying an argument, or the arguments that it expects, then you would get an error message. This is Python's way of telling us that in order for this function to run correctly, it requires additional information. And now it's back to you again. See if you can create a function called subtraction, which accepts two numbers and returns the difference between the two of them. Did you get it to work? Let's do it together and see what it should look like. So once again, we start with our keyword def, and then the function name subtraction. And this time inside the parentheses, we want to specify the arguments we are expecting. And then from there, we'll print a similar expression, but using the subtraction operator instead. And again, to call this function, we use the function name with brackets, and then we specify the numbers we want to compute. So I'll say 90 and 60. And I'm going to delete this call because that will just give us an error. And I think we've demonstrated that it won't work. And see what the output is here. 90 minus 60 equals 30. So here we have another example of defining a function using arguments or parameters. Well done. Now you know how to create functions with and without arguments. Try the exercises in the next section to demonstrate your understanding before we dive deeper into working with functions.